I don't usually host Light of the Southwest with Indiana Jones, but when I do, it's the most interesting man in the world, Dr. Ron Charles. How you doing?
Thank you, Brant.
We're the men in black today.
We are. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Johnny Cash wore black.
That's right.
Is there really any other color than black?
I see you got the memo. So we can
I know, man. I mean, we didn't even plan this, but I'm glad that we did. You know, I mentioned the black robes before on Light of the Southwest, the preachers whose fiery sermons inspired John Adams and John Hancock to compose the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
But now we're not the black robes, we're the black shirts. Welcome, folks. Hope you're doing great. You know this gentleman. You know Dr. Ron Charles from his fantastic shows and, of course, the incredible book, The Chase, and so many others. I'll never forget the day that I got to meet him, and we're going to go into that just a little bit. But how are you doing today?
Doing well.
Yeah.
And, good to be back in West Texas.
In West Texas, yeah. You were just in Amarillo, right there in Joe Kirkwood's church.
Yes, Cornerstone Ministries.
Cornerstone Ministries, yeah. I was there. I enjoyed it. And usually you go to Kingdom's Gate in Andrews, Texas with Kyle and Melissa Hooper and the gang, and here we are. And so glad that you're here. And thank you for watching today. And I always appreciate Daniel and the crew. Just the best here at GLC. You know, be sure and go to glc.us.com as we watch this show. And also, you'll see Dr. Ron Charles's website, cubitfoundation.org. You definitely want to go there and get every book that you can. I've told him often that I could have saved a lot of money at Bible college if I just met you. But it was 2009 when I first met you here at GLC.
Yes. Dr.
Ron Charles walked in the door and would proceed that day without a break to record 12 fantastic teachings. And I tell you, my life was never the same. More information about Jesus than you've ever heard of before. Every year, Time Magazine puts out a very lame article. Who was Jesus? Was he real? Of course he was real. And Dr. Ron Charles uncovered over a 30-year search in Europe and Asia and America, Africa, and got information that was hidden from the world, but still can be found in the Roman Senate annals, among so many other sources.
Yes.
With all that said, no pressure, Dr. Ron Charles. What's the newest book that you're writing right now?
Right now, the one that we have just finished, in for publication, but probably won't be out until November. Originally, we were going to call it as the Find, because we had the first one was called The Search,
right,
and then The Chase, then The Find. That would be the end of the trilogy. But I just felt impressed to change the title, and now the title is this really what Jesus had in mind?
Wow, tell you what, that's quite a title. And the answer is, I mean, he knew, the Lord knew what would be happening right now.
He did.
Whether or not the church looks the way he wanted it to look like, there's plenty of answers out there. What do you think?
I think Jesus's command was, you can't misinterpret it.
Right.
It is pretty straightforward and simple. Unfortunately, the church and Christians as a whole over the last 2,000 years have put their own twist on Jesus' command and came up with their own, which in reality became very complex.
Right. But to love one another,
Yeah.
to be known not by the size of the building or the size of the campuses or how many campuses or the technology or the budget, by their love for one another. And you live that out. I can't wait for, those of you who are watching Chasing Jesus with Dr. Ron Charles, you see his great shows right here on GLC. You see them on ITVN. You see them on YouTube. You see them on Facebook. I encourage you to check those out. Your life will never be the same because I love talking about Jesus and the things about Jesus. You know, as a little boy, Dr. Ron, and you are the fulfillment of this, but as a little boy, I'd see these commercials, if you remember some of them. You know, he never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born, which that's debatable. But they would go on to say that there's more information about Jesus outside of the Bible than Alexander the Great. And I'm thinking, well, if that's true, where's all this information about Jesus? Where is it at? Then I met Dr. Ron Charles. And so on Chasing Jesus, right here on GLC and those other places, you can see those lessons, learn more about Jesus than you ever have. And before we go into The Chase, which is your hallmark book, I mean, The Search, and then gosh, I can't keep up. If you go to the CubitFoundation.com, .org, you're going to see all those books. But you were a New York Times best-selling author before any of that,
right?
With a book called Street Walking.
Street Walking, yes.
Based on your street evangelism.
Exactly.
And tell us about that.
Well, that I was when I met my wife, I was on an evangelistic team called the Early Church on Wheels, and we would go to churches, have revival services at night, and then during the daytime we would take members of the congregation out and on door-to-door witnessing as well as street witnessing. And so street walking was basically just a kind of an autobiographical review of those experiences. And interesting point about that book is that my wife is the one who came up with the idea of the title Street Walking.
Wow.
And so with my background in archaeology, I was invited by communist Albania. It had not threw off the yoke of communism as yet, but they invited me to come there to excavate a Roman amphitheater they had discovered, and so they needed someone to help them pull all the resources together to begin excavating that amphitheater. And so a friend of mine who was with us on the trip was a newspaper man. And so he had taken a copy of my book to Albania, and the guards that were at the airport in Tirana, Albania, confiscated the book.
Wow.
Because it was called Street Walking, and they thought it was about prostitution.
Hey, wait a minute here.
And so it was then given to the Minister of the Interior, and then they called me in and began to question me about the book and why I was bringing a book of prostitution. And
wow.
And I said, it's not about prostitution. It's about personal evangelism and personal telling people about Christ. And so, of course, they were atheists, and but he said, I will confiscate this. This is mine. I said, okay. Well, in the back of the book, the last page or so, there's a prayer on how to accept Jesus. And so this minister read the book, and he prayed the prayer in the back, and then he called me in a few days later and asked me, given comments about what he had saw in the book and so forth. And he said, in this thing in the back, he says, I read this, and then I went back to read it again, as you had suggested, as a prayer. Now, does this mean that God heard that as a prayer? And I said, absolutely. And so this minister became the first Albanian official to accept Jesus Christ as a Savior because of a book that they thought was about prostitution.
See?
Yeah.
And of course, your wonderful wife, Paula, who's a part of our family. Your whole family is our family now. After the years we've got to work together and the adventures I've got to have with you. Just celebrated your 50th anniversary.
Yes, 2 days
wedding.
ago. Yeah.
Wow. And she's wonderful.
She is.
She's a keeper. You ought to keep hanging on.
One
to
of
her.
a kind, and I am going to keep her. She was special hand-picked gift that God gave to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It takes a special woman to be married to you, Ron. Not that you're difficult, because you're not. But, you know, in the opening of the show, I talked about the most interesting man in the world. Well, he is, for a lot of reasons. And I still don't know everything about you. But for those who say, hey, who is Ron Charles? You know, for those who say, hey, tell me your story. I know you've told it, you know, a million times. But for the audience now, we have so many new people watching GLC. A whole new demographic, in addition to the faithful pillars and people who have watched through the years. What do you tell them when they say, who is Dr. Ron Charles?
Well, my undergraduate education was civil engineering. But while studying for civil engineering, you had to take a certain number of archaeology courses, you know, to look at the construction techniques of the Romans and the Greeks and so forth, which you studied as an engineer, and I discovered that I really liked archaeology better than I did engineering. Wow. And so I used engineering as a way to make a living while I went back to get the education in archaeology. And so it's through archaeology that we had the opportunity to go in the various countries that we've gone into. And then while we're there, to do the work of the Lord under the umbrella of archaeology.
And not just any kind of archaeology. Those who remember, was a Time magazine about the discovery of Noah's Ark. And you're in there.
Yes.
Your picture's in there, you know, standing there with the guys. Tell us how that came about.
Well, there was a kind of a, not necessarily a contest, but there was a search that was given by the archaeological, the State Archaeological Museum in Cairo, Egypt, about Egyptian artifacts and so forth. And the challenge was to come up with a theory on how the Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Cheops, Khufu, was constructed. And so I came up with an idea, and there were a number of different ideas that were submitted, and there were three that they decided were logical. And those theories were then printed and placed in the museum, and mine was one of those three. And so, but in the meantime, Turkey was interested in finding out what a discovery that they had made, and I was asked to be part of a group to do the research because of the organizer of the group read about my work with the Great Pyramid of Egypt,
right.
And so he contacted me and asked me if I'd be willing to be part of this group to investigate this anomaly that's on Agradai and what the West calls Mount Ararat.
Wow.
And what it was in 1988, some of you may recall, there was an earthquake in Armenia. Agradai, or Mount Ararat, is located on the border of Armenia and Turkey.
Wow.
And there was a anomaly that they found, and there was a number of photographs taken of the mountain, because the apex of the earthquake was there at that mountain, and it had a permanent ice cap on the mountain.
Wow.
And so they were very much concerned of the stability of the ice on the mountain. They thought it was going to break loose and come crashing down the mountain and wiping people, villages, and so forth out. And so these hundreds of photographs were taken, but the photographs couldn't determine whether the ice was stable or not. And in some of those photographs, there was a crevasse that had opened up in the ice,
Right.
and within that crevasse there was a shadowy type object that was that they discovered and didn't know what it was, and so the photographs never were able to depict exactly what it was. And so there was a team put together, a research team, and the team was a joint venture between Russia, the United States, Turkey, and we were to this joint venture was to go there and actually climb the mountain and investigate, first of all, to see if the ice was stable.
Right.
And second of all, if we still had time between our weather window, so to speak, to investigate what this anomaly box-shaped type object was.
Up in the mountains of Ararat.
On the mountain, yes, that's correct. And so the problem with the whole thing was, and how Russia got involved, is that on the north side of this mountain, actually in Armenia itself, there was a military base that was there, and it was a nuclear military base.
Wow.
Operated by the Russians. Well, there was another military base on the south side of the mountain in Turkey, and that was a NATO military base.
Wow.
But both of them were had nuclear weapons. And so they were extremely worried that if the ice became unstable, that we could have a nuclear catastrophe.
Wow.
And so it was necessary to get that information. And so our first objective, and it was Russia in the whole gamut of things for the expedition. Russia supplied the high-tech equipment, subsurface radar and that type of thing. Turkey supplied the security, not only that went with us on the helicopter, but also once we got to the place, as well as the various type of equipment we would need, climbing gear and so forth. And America supplied the money and the research team.
Wow.
There were 8 of us that went. Plus,
what year is this?
This would be 1990.
Okay.
And so our first objective was to determine the stability of the ice, and then if that was stable, then we could go on to the next objective. And the second one was to determine what this thing was. The Russians said it was a nuclear device that America had planted on the mountain. Of course, America counter-blamed and said that no, Russia did it. So we were to find out exactly what it was.
And something extraordinary happened in midair.
It was. And we, first of all, we did determine that the ice was stable.
Good.
No problem. And so our first objective, the ultimate objective, was achieved. Second, we did investigate this object, and with many, many helicopter trips around the mountain, hovering in front of this thing, what it was. Obviously, it was not a nuclear device.
Right.
But what it was, we didn't know. It looked like it'd be made out of wood. And so it was quite interesting to say the least. And as we were hovering there, the helicopter pilot was a Russian. And in fact, he was President Gorbachev's personal helicopter pilot.
Wow.
So he had many years of experience, to say the least. He was atheist, a devout atheist.
Right.
And as we were hovering, looking at this object as it was sticking out of the ice, he began to cry. And I was standing right beside him, and I said, Yuri, is there something wrong? You have a problem? He said, yes, that's my problem. And pointing to the object, he said, I've been taught my entire life that this was a fairy tale. This was Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. But now I see with my own eyes that this is real. And so if this is real, then maybe there's more things in your Bible that are real also. And I said, absolutely. And so then I got a chance to tell him about Jesus. He accepted Jesus as a Savior. Went back to Russia as a brand new believer in Jesus Christ.
Wow. And of course, Time Magazine covered that. I didn't read the article. I'm not able to find it right now, but I've seen the pictures from Time Magazine.
Yeah.
And you and the team and the structure. And without a doubt, you still believe that's the Ark?
Well, it didn't have a sign on it that said Noah's Ark. But, if you look like a duck, you fly like a duck, and your characteristics are the duck. I'm not going to say you're a duck, but
good chance.
Good chance.
Now, is that the same structure that Christians from China made a trip to and actually got wood samples from?
No, it is not the same one.
Okay.
The structure that we saw, we were not able to get inside,
Right.
Because it was all filled with ice. We did bring back wood samples, and Palo Alto laboratories evaluated them, studied them. The object that we saw was about 90 to 100 feet wide. It was also about 50 feet tall, and approximately 690 feet long.
600.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And made out of wood. We took core samples of the wood, and the wood was petrified or frozen. Could be one of the two, because it was encased in ice and totally frozen. But the walls were approximately 4 feet thick, and in the floor was about 6 feet thick.
Wow.
And it's made out of a process that they call a gophering process. A gophering process is it's kind of like plywood, laminates of wood pressed together. And with the samples that were brought back, it indicated that there were 15 different types of wood that were used, and 12 of those were identifiable. The others were not identifiable. And then on the inside and the outside of the object, there was this maybe an inch to an inch and a half of a kind of a tarry, varnishy type stuff that obviously waterproofing type things.
So without a doubt, that's the Ark.
And so, had the same dimensions as what Genesis says, made out of wood, made from the gophering process.
Wow.
Resting on top of a mountain that's been identified as Ararat.
Right.
And so I'm convinced, but I can't make a public statement saying that, yes, absolutely, until there is an absolute answer.
Wow. And that's just one grain of sand in the story of what you do and what you have done and are involved with. In all this timeline, when did the Cubit Foundation begin?
Actually, the Cubit Foundation, we established that in 1985.
Okay. So 5 years before this.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And someone says, what's the Cubit Foundation?
Well, the Cubit Foundation is an education foundation and humanitarian. We aren't necessarily preachers, but we work at one time exclusively in Muslim countries,
right.
But we have expanded, and so now we're in other countries as well. But primarily, we are there to bring the life of Jesus and the testimony of Jesus into the people of the particular country we're working in. And we use archaeology as the leverage,
right?
And as the ability to get into those countries. And then once we are there with the umbrella of archaeology, then we're able to do what God has called us to do in the humanitarian area, especially with widows and orphans.
And you've been doing that for...
Oh, we've been in Egypt this is our 32nd year.
32nd year.
Yeah.
I've been there with you 3 times.
Yeah.
And the
And
incredible work.
Then we were in Albania for 5 years before
Right.
that. Yeah.
You actually helped Albania write its new constitution.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So, folks, there's a whole lot of things that you will be convinced this is the most interesting man in the world. But I'm very excited about today and what you're going to hear, too. Fascinating truths about Jesus, historical documents that verify, and, of course, archaeology that verifies, and like you always say, Dr. Ron, the Bible's always been true. Doesn't prove the Bible, right? But the Bible's true. It's always been true. But with the Cubit Foundation, if you go to cubitfoundation.org, you can see not only the great writings, all the great books, but the incredible work of the orphanages, schools being built in South America, incredible work at the Bags of Hope for the widows and orphans in a part of Egypt, Garbage City, which there's been a lot of change since then. You go from first being a missionary to Egypt to becoming Trump's pick for ambassador
yeah.
and President El Sisi's pick as well. That's what they wanted. And I tell you what a story that we're about to go into. But before we do that, go to glc.us.com. Folks, get behind true media. Get behind non-censored true news and the best news, which is Jesus Christ. But you want to get behind what God is doing, and He's doing great things here at GLC. You're a part of that, Ron. You were a part of that in a big way. Here you are back again. So happy that you are. But folks, it's important that in this battle, as we fight the prince of the air, that we come together with our resources. We use our buying power and our giving power to get behind what God is doing. So go to glc.us.com. You'll see throughout the show opportunities to mail in payments, to send things in through the mail, through online. If you go to glc.us.com/give, you'll go right to the giving page. That's the page that I use whenever I do that method as well. But all that to say is, get behind what God is doing. We are fighting the prince of the air when we do media, and when we do it well. And this is just one of the avenues that I have the honor to be involved with voluntarily. I'm here as a volunteer, as is Ron, and so many times the crew as well. So, you know what? Let's come together right now and be a force to be reckoned with. The command, Dr. Ron, that our friend Dan Galloway would always say. Dan Galloway, for those of you who know him, praise the Lord, But he'd always say the command to take dominion never went away. So we are to take dominion, and we are to continue in that. And we are taking dominion. We are taking the enemy's territory back. And you're a part of that. So thank you for giving to GLC. And thank you for getting behind the work of the Cubit Foundation. You're going to hear amazing stories, and we could talk for days. But all that to say is what God is doing through Dr. Ron Charles and Paula and the Cubit Foundation. You want to check that out. Go to cubitfoundation.org. Be sure and get every one of those books, folks. If you have a home Bible study group, a lot of churches stopped meeting during COVID, okay? And some of them didn't. But if you have a home Bible study or you just want to learn things that support what you've been learning in the Scriptures, you want to get a copy of The Chase. You want to get a copy of these incredible lessons about Jesus that we're going to go into pretty soon. But back to Ron and back to Egypt. You went from Albania to Egypt.
Correct, yes.
And you had a confirmation before you ever went that we were talking about earlier.
Right. It was, we were, it was amazing time in Albania. And, they had been, for the last 500 years, they had been under Ottoman Islamic rule for 450 years, then under really hardline communism, atheistic communism for the last 50. And so they were, for all practical purposes, the name of Jesus had not been allowed in the borders of that country for over 500 years.
Wow.
And they even had a special police force whose job was to eliminate the influence of God from the borders of Albania. And so through archaeology, we received the invitation to go there when it was still communist. And so we began the excavations, and we would be on local television, and we had the opportunity to tell them, it says, you know, you're, and tell them through archaeology, through discoveries. And we say that, you know, all of your life, all of your generations, from the Romans and the Greeks and the Turks and so forth, Persia, and all the way down the line, you've never had the choice of what God you're going to worship or what religion you're going to do. It was dictated to you. Only one time in your history, one time, did you have the opportunity to choose what you wanted. And in that first century, you chose Christianity.
Wow.
And not only did you choose Christianity, you chose to die for the cause of Christ, and which they did do. Over 5,000 martyrs were killed in the blood games there in Albania, in the arena in Albania. And we would show them through archaeological evidence, showing them that in this first century, your relatives, your ancestors chose Jesus. And so it was a great way to evangelize that country.
Wow.
And so it was wonderful. And so we had some great things going on there. And then the Lord called us to Egypt. And I was very confused on
That's
why.
quite a change of cultures there.
Oh yeah, quite a bit.
But you know, when he called you, he really called you.
He did. And I was praying, I was seeking the Lord, and didn't know really what the real answer was. I felt that maybe this was what God wanted, but why would he have us leave such a great opportunity there in Albania to go to Egypt? And so I was in the middle of an empty lot. I was praying, trying to concentrate on what the Lord wanted, and I looked down, and then as I looked back up, I actually saw an image or a vision of a person standing there. I couldn't see his face, and I couldn't see the top half of his body, but I did see nail prints in the feet. And this image spoke to me and said, I'm pleased with what you've done here in this country, but I am sending you to Egypt. And I will confirm to you through my word that this is what I want. And so, yes, this is me. And so I didn't need any more confirmation. We packed up and moved to Egypt. And this is our 32nd year now in Egypt.
And I've seen with my own eyes the incredible ministry of the Cubit Foundation there. And life-changing, changed my life, you know. Had a life-changing epiphany when you first came to GLC and sat there and began to tape those 12 messages about Jesus, which you're going to hear some stories about Jesus you've never heard before. And, you know, no wonder sometimes pastors are bored. The Bible is never boring, and it's a crime to make it boring. But there's so many stories about Jesus that support the scriptures. The widow's son at Nain, was that a little Jewish boy, or was it a Roman soldier? The man that Jesus told to pick up his mat and walk, is that someone that they dug a little hole in a straw roof or something? Or was that a major annual, incredible, thousands of people event? And was that person a Roman senator? You're going to hear some of those things. coming up in our second hour.
That's the difference between real history and Hollywood.
There you go. There you go. And you know what? I mean, your life could be a Hollywood movie. I mean, you know, there's Forrest Gump, which I love that movie. But the Lord has used you in crucial places in history, you know, and it's amazing. It really, really is amazing. But I've been with you in Germany, that beautiful group of people in the Bible college and church there. Been with you in the streets of Cairo and Garbage City, where you used to have to, well, you worked very hard to get in there and to minister to the people. Folks, you need to go to Egypt and you need to minister outside of this country. You know, your freedoms that so many flippantly give away out of fear or convenience, you got to go outside of the United States to see how good you've got it. You know, there's that song by the Beatles, USSR, you don't know how lucky you are. No. No, we don't want to go communism that we're seeing right now, the attempts by that. You don't know how lucky you are, America, especially believers in America.
Exactly.
You're going to have a chance not only to get involved with the incredible work of the Cubit Foundation, but you will have a chance to maybe have a fresh perspective of what God's given you in this free country while it's still free, and may it remain free. With that said, you went to Egypt with a divine call. You know, a lot of pastors, well, the Lord called me when it's a higher salary. The Lord's calling me, right? And sometimes he does, you know, sometimes he does. Sometimes he doesn't. But you were called to Egypt for sure. And you were there for, I believe, 6 years before something very special happened.
Well, actually 10 years.
10 years, okay, 10 years.
And we were, you know, we had such a great ministry and that the Lord allowed us to be involved with in Albania, and it was just wonderful. And we, you know, it's when God kissed the earth, and we were right in the middle of the kiss.
Wow.
There in Albania, and of course we were anticipating the same type of move for the Lord in Egypt, and said, okay, Albania is all atheist, Egypt's all Muslim. There shouldn't be too much of a difference.
Boy, are you in for a surprise.
I was in for a great surprise. And in my mind, I felt, okay, God is going to be with us. Holy Spirit's going to open the doors and go before us and break down all these barriers and be just like walking through fire with a fire extinguisher. And so there would be no problems, no difficulties.
And millions of people would surround you, and you'd stand on top of the pyramid.
That's right.
Praise the Lord, you know. And right, that's what you had envisioned. That's what you'd hope
right.
for.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But we began to minister, and I tell you, there's nothing like beating your head against a brick wall to bring things back into reality.
Wow.
And we ministered in Egypt for 10 years before we got our first convert.
Wow.
And it was hard, extremely difficult.
Uh-huh.
And but finally, after 10 years of ministry, we got that first person accepting Jesus.
And was that person by any chance on the Nile River?
Absolutely, he was. And we, if you have a couple of minutes, I can.
Oh, brother, we
it.
have more than a couple of minutes.
Well, actually, I gave the Lord a challenge.
Uh-huh.
And I was in Luxor, Egypt, and at the time, and I was very discouraged. And I told the Lord, I said, okay, I'll give you one more day. And if we don't get any results from our efforts on this day, this was on a Thursday, if we don't get any results, I'm heading back to America tomorrow. And I booked a flight, and I was ready to go back. And so I've had it. It's enough. 10 years is enough. if nothing happens in over 10 years, then it's pretty obvious that I missed God someplace, somehow, somewhere. And so at the end of that day, we came back into the house. Nothing had happened, just like nothing had happened the 10 years before. And so I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to go down to the Nile River. I'm going to hire a boat, and we're going to go out. We're going to row out to the middle of the Nile, and I'm going to watch the sun go down one last time. And it was a beautiful sight. It's one of those memorable things. But watch the sun go down one last time over the Nile, and then pack and get out of here. Never to see Egypt again for as long as I live. So I went down to the Nile River, and there was a man there, and he was a Bedouin man, and he had a boat maybe 7-8 feet long, not a large one, a small. And so I hired him to take me out into the middle of the Nile, and so I could watch the sun go down. He was sitting on one end of the boat, and I was sitting on the other. And of course, he was rowing, and I was pouting. And God needed to know that I was angry with him, okay? Because, nothing moves the hand of God to know that Ron Charles was angry.
That's right. That's at the top of his concern list there.
And so as we rowed out, I was sitting there sulking and pouting, and the guy was at the other end with a great big smile on his face. Well, I didn't want him to smile at me. I didn't want to smile at him.
Right.
I didn't want that. But finally, I kind of got embarrassed for him. And I said, hello. And he says, oh, hi, you can talk. I said yes, I can talk.
And they're very funny over there with tourists.
Oh, yeah.
They speak very good English, many of them.
Probably some of their English is better than mine.
You go to the pyramids, hey, howdy doody day. Oh, hey, brother from another mother. They're funny.
Yeah.
And so he was waiting for you to talk.
He was. And he said, and so we talked. He said, yes, I can talk. It's very nice to meet you. And he said, oh, you speak English. You speak American English. And I said, yes, I do. He said, you must be American. I said, yes, I'm American. He said, oh, America, good people. I like America. Americans, perfect people. I like George Bush. He's a good friend of mine.
He's a good friend, yeah.
I said, okay, well, that's good. And he says, you're American. You must be Christian. All Americans are Christian. I said, yes, I'm Christian. He says, Christian are nice people. I like Christians. They're good people. Good tourists. Christians, good tourists.
Bread and butter in Egypt, yeah.
And he says, Jesus Christ, he's a good friend of mine. And I said, well, that's good. So Jesus is your friend. I said, yeah. And I said, do you know about Jesus? Yeah. I said, well, tell me what do you know? Well, Jesus is Isa. He's in Quran.
Yeah.
And Jesus a good prophet, best prophet, not the best without Muhammad. Muhammad best, but after Muhammad, Jesus best after Muhammad. I said, okay, but Jesus was more than a prophet. I know you Christians. Yes, you say that Jesus is son of God, son of Allah. Jesus is not son of Allah. God has no wife. And if God has no wife, how can God have son? And I said, okay, I understand your reasoning on that. He says, so if Jesus is son of God, then I too am son of God, and you son of God, everybody's son of God. but not only son, that Jesus is not. Jesus prophet. I said, okay, well, let me ask you something. He said, yes. He said. I said, who makes life? God makes life. I said, okay. Can the man on the shore over here leading a camel, can he make life? No. God only, not this man. I said, what about over here on this one, this bank, the man that's washing the water buffalo? Can he make life? No, he cannot. I said, can you make life? He said, no, I cannot make life. And I said, can I make life? He said, no, you're not God. You cannot make life. I said, so only God makes life. Yes, only God makes life. I said, okay. I want to tell you a story. This story is in your Quran. Yes, we have many stories in Quran. And I said, do you believe the Quran? Yes, I believe Quran. I said, what is Quran? Quran's just the words of Allah. And you agree. You believe it. Yes, I believe Quran. I said, so if it's written in there, you believe? Yes, I believe. I said, well, I want to tell you a story about Jesus that's written in your Quran. Yes, we have many stories of Isa. Isa is Arabic for Jesus.
Yes.
He said, we have many stories of Isa in Quran. And I said, well, this particular story, most Christians do not believe that it actually happened, but it is written in your Quran. So if it's written in your Quran, then you believe. Yes, I believe. I said, well, in this story, Jesus was with some people, and he reached down into the ground, and he pulled together clay, dirt, and clay from the ground. And with that, he molded the image of birds. And he held these clay images in his hands, and then he blew on them. And then the birds came alive, and they flew off. I said, now, answer me this. If God is the only person who can make life, and Jesus made life, and it's recorded in your Quran that Jesus made life, then who is Jesus? And he was silent for a long time. Probably no more than 5 or 10 minutes, but it seemed like 5 or 10 hours to me. And finally, he kind of dropped his head. And he says, I don't know. I can't say. I said, well, why don't you let me tell you about Jesus and who he is. And there in the middle of the Nile River, by then it was dark, but by starlight and moonlight, this man became our first convert, accepting Jesus as his Savior. And so that was an indication to us that it was time to stay.
He wasn't your first convert. He was also your first, what would become a pastor.
Yes, he did. And he said, I want to introduce you to my family. I said, okay. So I was anticipating going over a couple of streets there in Luxor and go to his house and meet his family. Well, no, that was not the case. We got to the shoreline, then we got on camels. And we took off into the Sahara Desert, and we rode, and all the time I was thinking, this guy is a charlatan. He's
going to kill me.
Yeah, he's going to kill me. And
it wasn't down the street, down the block. It was...
it was out
through hours the desert. 2.5
hours into the desert. And all the time I felt like I was going to be robbed, be jumped by bandits or murderers at any minute. But we finally got to a very small little oasis. And this oasis was probably not even larger than this room of the
Wow.
studio. And when we got there, there was a small little hut made out of palm leaves. And then there was a fire going out in front in the yard. And we got there and we let the camels down. And he whistled. And when he whistled, his wife and 5 children came out. And the children aged from about 9 or 10 up to about 20, 21. And he says, "This is my good friend, good American friend. I meet him today, and he showed me, he told me about Isa. And this is not Quran Isa, real Isa. And I bring this Isa into me, into my heart today. And now you will too. Bow down."
There you go.
So those 7 people, and they did, they dropped to their knees, and whether it was through conviction of the Holy Spirit or fear of Father, I don't know. But they did accept Christ, and that was the beginning of the Bedouin church. And that Bedouin church now runs over 700, and is still growing as we speak.
Wow. What a journey. What a start to a journey. And amazing things that would happen in years to follow. Amazing ministry in Garbage City where they would have Christian... It's illegal to convert to Christianity in Cairo, and it was. And they would move the believers to Garbage City. Didn't matter if you were a doctor or a lawyer. You would go there to drink the black water, to wear the trash, to eat the trash. Folks, you got it so good here. You don't know how good you got it. I pray that you seize these days, and you're going to hear about this amazing journey. Also making history. So many times you've made history. The Lord has made the history through you. I got to be with you. The first time in over 1,000 years that we were allowed, believers, outsiders, allowed to openly minister to the persecuted.
Yeah.
You're going to hear about that in this next hour. Folks, get behind great things. You know, people help people who help people. Get behind what God is doing. You've been seeing the website, the bottom of your screen, cubitfoundation.org. Get behind that. Sow a seed in that. Get those books. Educate yourself. You're going to hear stories about Jesus in this next hour you never heard before. And support those who broadcast these great lessons from your TV show that Christy produces. Yeah. You're the one teaching to them. Footage from Israel, footage from Egypt, and other places in the country where they've been shot. Some of them are services in churches where you'll hear things about Jesus you never heard before. Is he a reality to you? He's a reality to me. I know him. I love him. I hope you know him. I hope you love him. He's a prayer away, you know, and it doesn't stop there with a prayer. He loves you. He's a real person who entered into his own creation. God did, and gave us a way, salvation, a part of his incredible plan. And he's got good news. If it's not good news, it's not the gospel. He's got good news. And we're going to talk about that in our next hour, and also the amazing journey. Be sure and go to glc.us.com. glc.us.com/give. Get involved. I don't need your money. I'm not interested in your money. But it takes money for this place to broadcast GLC. And also go to the Cubit Foundation. You know, when you buy those incredible books and you learn things about Jesus you've never learned before, that helps the widows and orphans you're going to hear about in the Bags of Hope. In our last few minutes of this first part, Ron, Dr. Ron, tell us briefly about the Bags of Hope for the widows, and we'll touch on that too in the next hour.
Okay.
They can have a chance to help.
Well, in the Islamic world, when a woman marries a man, it's for life. And as for life through dictates of Islam. But a wife is a gift to the husband. And if they feel like the wife is not being the type of gift he should be, then Allah takes her husband away from her.
Wow.
And it's how they feel. Is that so? And so she's not allowed to marry again. So whether it be by divorce or by death, if she is separated from her husband, then it's her punishment for not being the type of wife that she has to have. And the estate that they collected together is not hers when he dies or is misplaced or is taken out of the way. It belongs to the next male member of the family. And that's where the problems begin.
Well, and a widow is considered cursed by God.
Yes.
Over here, if there's a widow, we're so sorry for your loss. You know, can we help you? How can we help you? Over there, it's your fault if your husband dies. Can you imagine that? There's not a welfare system like we have over here.
There is not.
And so
it's not even. And it's up to that male member to determine your fate.
Right. Even if you and your husband accumulated an estate, it's still in the hands of the next male. And they can decide whether or not you, as a widow, have a place to live.
And there are more than 2 million widows in Cairo that the decision was made for them not to be able to live in their home. So now they're living under bridges, under stairwells, next to a sewage ditch or wherever.
And in Cairo, the people are beautiful. You know, Egyptians are not Arabs. Did you know that? Egyptians are beautiful people, but you think everyone's an Arab over there. No, it's not in the Middle East. No. And God bless the Arabs too. But, you know, the Egyptians, they're a beautiful people that we fell in love with. And you'll see why too. And it's worth getting involved, helping these widows. That's perfect religion, is it not? Yes. You know, you preached about that yesterday.
Yes.
Feeding widows and orphans. It's not about the magazines, the TV shows, the radio shows, the towers, the campuses. It's all about loving one another. And perfect religion, if you're going to do that, is taking care of widows and orphans. And you should, and you do, and we will. So you won't believe this next hour of Live the Southwest, talking about Jesus and this amazing journey. We'll see you in just a little bit. Welcome back, Light of the Southwest with Dr. Ron Charles. What an exciting time we have had. And we're just getting started. You know, we were touching on before the break how you had the amazing call to Egypt, the amazing conversion in Egypt. Your first pastor, conversion, became a pastor of a church over 700, Bedouin pastor today. And then also the bags of hope, of feeding the widows and orphans, how that is perfect religion according to the Lord, and how you can get involved with feeding widows and orphans in Egypt and other places of the world too. The Cubit Foundation is a global foundation, humanitarian organization, and education organization, doing great things. And so do some great things with this. And speaking of great things, tell us more about the Bags of Hope. How did all that come together? Because it is a powerful thing now. How did that start, Dr. Ron?
Well, as I had mentioned in the first hour, when a widow becomes a widow, which means that her husband is removed from her because she's now cursed, being punished, then that relieves the government of any type of assistance.
Wow.
because they wouldn't interfere with God's judgment on
That's
that.
their culture. Yeah, right.
That's right. And so, consequently, they hit the streets. And in the Islamic world, the women are not really encouraged through education.
Right.
So they're not trained to do much. They're trained to be a wife. They're trained to be a mother.
Right.
And beyond that, there's just not a lot of training for a woman who is a widow.
Right.
She doesn't know how to do nothing. So she has to do what she can do. And the typical salary of a typical Egyptian is about $700 a year.
A year.
But to a widow, she does very well if she gets about $60 a year. And then the government takes part of that for the privilege of living underneath their bridge.
Wow.
And so we saw this and didn't know what we were going to do about it. And it stayed in the back of our mind for a while. But then one morning, my wife and I were doing devotions, and she was reading in James, the first chapter. And as she was reading, she read James 1:27 about perfect religion, undefiled religion, a type of religion that God approves of and that He supports. And that perfect, undefiled religion is to minister to the fatherless and to the widows.
Wow.
And I said, stop. Go back and read that again. And so she went back and read it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And it finally got into my head. Okay, so true religion, undefiled religion, is ministering to the fatherless, to the orphans, and to the widows. I said, go back and read it just one more time. And I discovered something. It's a 2-part discovery. Discovery number 1 is that real religion, God-pleasing religion, had nothing whatsoever to do with denominations.
Right.
Had nothing to do with ministerial societies.
Right.
Or Bible schools.
Uh-huh.
Or ordination programs.
Uh-huh. Come on.
Had nothing whatsoever to do with Sunday school drives.
Uh-huh.
But it had a whole lot to do with supporting orphans and widows.
It wasn't an outreach program.
That's right.
It was the program.
It was the program. And then the second part of that realization was James said absolutely nothing about supporting Christian widows.
Wow.
He said nothing about supporting Jewish widows.
Right.
Or Roman widows.
Right.
Or Greek widows.
Right.
Persian widows.
Right.
He just says widows.
Right.
Period. And I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and we both hit us at the same time. We got 2 million plus widows
Uh-huh.
that are starving.
Wow.
And James has told us to care for them.
Wow.
We don't ask them whether they're Christian or not.
Right.
We don't ask them if they're Muslim. We don't ask them if they're atheists.
Right.
We know that they're in need and are starving. So we began to give these widows a bag of hope. A bag of hope is a canvas bag about 1 meter tall that we fill full of rice, beans, macaroni, and different staples like that. And it's enough to feed a widow and 4 children for an entire month.
Wow.
So each of these widows get one a month. And right now we're supporting about 1,200 widows, plus the same number or more of children. And so it's something that we feel is not only meeting a need with these widows, but is fulfilling the commandment of God when we talk about true religion and real religion, and that we are doing what God told us to do. And we feel very comfortable doing it. Not only are we continuing to do it in Egypt, but it's spread. into India, Pakistan, Egypt, not only Egypt, but Sudan and Libya.
Wow.
Syria. We're also going to Mexico and Colombia and Venezuela,
Wow.
Guatemala, many places with the same program.
And the way that you're achieving this in Egypt is through a miracle, an oasis of sorts in the Sahara. We were there. I've been there twice. Bigger grapes than the adjoining acres. Amazing. Okra, grapes, eggplant, onions. I was pulling onions out of the desert. It's a miracle, so much so that it gained the attention of the president of Egypt. And the people are afraid, but in awe, because they're not getting that results necessarily when they pray, but through a miracle in the desert that God gave you and that has flourished. It's a living miracle to this day, and it's feeding these widows and orphans, and then some.
4 years ago, the Lord placed it on my heart that we need to have a farm.
Yeah.
To supplement the bags of hope and to give these widows some fresh food, and to help them. And so we were in the process of trying to purchase a little 4-acre farm, and in the meantime, one of our very dear friends, his wife's father died.
Wow.
And gave her an inheritance, and that inheritance was 4 acres of land. And she gave that to the Cubit Foundation to be used for the benefit of the widows, for us to grow crops. And that particular area of land is in the delta of Egypt, in the area they call Gushan. And now in Texas speak, it's called Goshen.
Goshen.
But we're up there, and previously that acreage, that 4 acres of land, produced about a ton of produce per acre, which is pretty good, and that's consistent with all of the land around in that area, about a ton an acre.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether that's eggplant or squash or okra or beans or onions or whatever, but it's about the same. And so we, in that first year, we produced a little more than that, about a ton and a half of produce. And then we walked the acreage. My wife and I, we walked it, and I can't remember, Brant, whether you were part of that or not. You may have been. That we walked the land and realizing, giving it to God, saying that this is the widow's land.
Yes.
And Lord, we want you to bless it and bless the production, and literally took it out of our hands and placed it into the hands of God.
Oh, and what did God do?
And
with it? Oh, it was amazing.
We named it God's Widow's Farm.
Right.
Well, the second year, we were at 2.5 tons
of food per acre.
Food per acre. By the third year, we were topping 4 tons. And now going into the 5th year, we are now hitting at 9.5
Wow.
tons per acre. Now the other acreage and the other farms in the area are still at 1, but we're at 9.5, going up to 10. And there's so much food that far more than what the widows can eat. And so because of that, this has given us the opportunity to expand and begin to give produce to the needy families, not just the widows, but families as a whole. And then we also go down to the market, we harvest,
Wow.
go to the market and sell, and the proceeds from what we sell at the market goes to the widows.
Wow.
We pay for their doctor's appointments and dentists and shoes, school supplies, blankets, and anything that they need. And that all goes 100%, every penny, for the widows and those needy families. and it's and God is just blessing over and over and over. We had to originally, 5 years before, we had to, we were farming by hand,
Right.
digging with a shovel, hand carrying water to water the plants in the irrigation. Well, God has brought another miracle with that. We've your audience, your television audience, as well as those acquainted with Cubit, supplied the money for us to buy tractors and plows and trucks to take the produce to market and so forth. And then there was one of the greatest miracles, the irrigation. Water was, the supply of water was about 400 yards away.
Wow.
And it was a small supply. It's certainly not enough to service the entire acreage. But that's where the closest we had to go to carry the water by hand. And so the Nile River was about 3 miles away. And so to bring the water through an irrigation system from there into our acreage was going to be quite expensive. But a very dear friend of ours, who was a minister not a preaching minister, but in the interior ministry of the country of Albania, of Egypt, and a senior parliamentarian, he says that he wanted to help with God's Widow's Farm. And so he funded over $1 million and paid every penny of a new irrigation system that went all the way from the Nile River to our land, is irrigating the entire acreage, which that acreage is now, as a result of this man also buying extra land and giving it to us. We now have 10 acres.
Wow.
And so now the miracle is we now have irrigation.
Tenfold.
That's right. And
Wow.
God just continues to bless. The farm has come to the attention not only of the various branches of government, but all the way up to the office of the president.
Yes, he took notice too.
He did. And we were front page news on the Cairo daily paper. And it wasn't any pats on the back to me or to Cubit, but what was emphasized is God's widow's farm.
Right. And is it Surah 5:2?
Yeah.
In the Quran
Yes.
talks about helping widows.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
you're fulfilling even what their scriptures
That's right.
are saying. Of course, we know in James, for us to do that too. Folks, it's not an outreach program. Let's not else have a program in outreach. Man, you are the outreach. The church was never meant to be a place to escape the world, but strategic bases to invade the world, to take dominion, and with the love of God, right? And so when we relegate those things to an outreach program, and then we wonder why God's not blessing your church, well, you know what? Get involved with what he's doing and feed the hungry. Someone wonderful once said, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. You invited me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and in prison and you visited me. When you've done this to the least of these, you've done it to me. So do it and be that difference. I've heard people praying for revival. Ron, my 38 years of ministry involvement so far, you got more than that on me, but number one, revival often comes after persecution.
Mm-hmm.
But also revival many times just starts with people coming to the realization that we're to be the revival. I remember being in Andrews, Texas, and a sound guy at the Cowboy Church, man, we need revival. We need the revival. And we were seeing things happen there, incredible things happen in that town. I said, brother, let's be the revival. You have everything you need to be the revival. What are you waiting for? And then in this case, you're being the revival over there. A drink of cold water to a little one, right? and helping the widows, helping those who've been forgotten, and outdoing the world. And, you know, Ron, you do that. You know, believers are to do that. We're to do that with television, with radio, with media. We're not supposed to copy the world and have what they call Christian crud, cheesy stuff. No, man, we're supposed to take dominion and be above and beyond. That's why you need to get involved with people that are doing the work of the Lord. If you can't go to Egypt, guess what? You can be in Egypt through your gifts, through your support. You know, you may not be able to record a TV show or a podcast yet, but you can get behind a place like GLC that does that internationally and locally. Millions of households are watching this right now. Go to cubitfoundation.org and get behind what God is doing. You'll be blessed for it. Go to glc.us.com/give and get behind what God is doing. Let me tell you something. Sometimes the worst place in the world is the behind the scenes at a ministry. Not so here. Guess what? This is pure here. This is a pure ministry here at GLC, man. The team, man, they're pure hearts. And also volunteers that come together. If there's a Christian TV network, you get behind this one. I want to personally encourage you. That's why I volunteer mine. I'm driving 8 hours today just to volunteer my time. Why? Because I believe in this. And I believe in incredible people like Dr. Ron Charles. And so back to the Cubit Foundation, fulfilling history, getting the attention of the president, and backing from there. Now, do you want to go into the situation with the being favored as and preferred as an ambassador?
Well, it came as a surprise. I received notification that I was one of 28 people that were being considered as an appointee to the ambassador of Egypt, and which I certainly felt privileged. I didn't solicit the position, and
no, you didn't.
And I don't even know if I wanted it at that time. But
and you were told about it by somebody who gave you a word. And you know what? We've all heard millions of those, but when it's real, it's real.
When it's real, it's real. There's a very good dear friend of mine, a prophet who I trust. I can't say that about all those that say there are prophets.
Right.
But I trusted him, and
Ron Teal.
Ron Teal, and he told me that God wants you, or God has called you to do a special service. He says, and what I keep hearing is ambassador. And he said, now I don't know if that means you're going to be a political ambassador for Christ, or whether it's going to open other doors through the avenue of ambassador. He said, I don't know, but if I hear anything more from the Lord, I'll tell you, and you keep in touch with me. And I said, okay. And so it went along back and forth for a while, and to make a long story short, it got down to a short list of 3 people. And I just was evaluating what all this meant, and as I prayed about it, I kind of felt the Lord speaking to my heart and saying, "Remember your calling."
Right.
What are you here for? Why are you in Egypt? Are you here to make a name for yourself in the political arena?
Which you very easily could have done, still can do if you wanted to.
Or are you here to let my name be known and to minister to these people? And so I walked into the powers that be over there, and I basically said, listen, an ambassador is the 3-piece seat in champagne. I'm a blue jean and Coca-Cola guy. And so I want to take my name off the list, and
Wow.
I'll be satisfied to do what we've been doing for the last 30 years. And so, but it didn't, it wasn't a negative thing. It's actually turned out to be a positive thing.
Well, it allowed you, and that favor allowed you to make history, to do something that hasn't been done in over 1,000 years. And we were there. We saw it. We were there.
Right.
And I don't know how much there's things that I know you have to be sensitive about, that you know and that you don't want to broadcast. But the nations that came together on one of those nights, and no pressure, but the door opening or the door closing for ministry depended on that night.
Yes, it did.
And we were there, and the door's been opened.
And at that service that night, we were just before the service began, within 5 minutes of the service beginning, we were told by the officials that were there. He said there'll be representation here tonight from the governments of Kuwait, of Libya, of Sudan, Algeria, and these and Syria, and these representatives are here to view how this service goes. If there's a positive reaction, then there's a potential of opening doors for you in those countries. If there's not a positive reaction, then those doors would be closed perhaps permanently and forever. And so, and then we started. And it was something that I had never experienced before, that type of pressure. So
You're right. Yeah.
And but we just let God work it.
And he sure did, didn't he?
He did.
He sure did. And the precious people who just a year before were imprisoned for going to a service.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were there. They were afraid in the beginning, but then they began to trickle in. And then you had a full house. And the worship was unbelievable. We were singing How Great Is Our God, Chris Tomlin, and then to hear them sing that in Arabic.
In Arabic, yeah.
And then we sang it together. It was amazing, but the door was open. And some of those moments were kind of scary. You know, I was the first off the bus and the last to get on. And I was with the other guards. I didn't have a gun, but they did. But I tell you what, I loved every minute of it. Fell in love with the Egyptian people. Beautiful, beautiful people. And you will too. And just saw that incredible ministry firsthand. And then seeing the rock church, it was carved out with pickaxes. They're in Garbage City. You know, we don't even do justice. We need to do another lots about this whole thing too. Another 2 hours, you'll want to hear all about it. But it's an amazing thing to watch what the Lord has done with you, Dr. Ron, continues to do with you, and the global reach of the Cubit Foundation. Perhaps before, when you've been on Live the Southwest, you talked about one of the books, and we will get to a story about Jesus. You know, I don't know how much you talked about in depth about the Cubit Foundation, but I wanted people to know in this one the far reach of the Cubit Foundation and how you can be a part of that, the widows and orphans all over the earth, and so much more. You don't even realize all that they do. Such a wonderful ministry. So go to there, cubitfoundation.org, and get involved. Get involved, and you will be blessed for it. I know that you will be. So, my goodness.
Well, at the end of this service,
Yeah. Okay.
every one of these representatives came to us independently and said, our doors are open.
That's
You're
right.
welcome.
That's right.
So,
Well, you know, there's a misconception in the Muslim world towards, if you're not Muslim, you're Christian. It doesn't matter if you are or not. But you know what, though? You open my eyes to a lot, and I don't even call myself a Christian. I call myself a follower of Jesus. Yeah. Because there's a lot of people who call themselves Christians, but they kill the children. They support communism. that support evil. So don't call me a Christian. Call me a follower of Jesus. Because we don't kill our children. We don't gossip. We don't slander. We don't oppress. We don't support communism or death. We support the love of Jesus, being his hands and feet on the earth. And my life was changed the first time this man came in 2009 talking about Jesus. It was changed again in Egypt. And you saw a change in my life as well.
I did.
But watching you speak about Jesus in a way that I've never heard before, and I definitely didn't hear it in Bible college. You know, we like to say context is king. Pastors, you want context for your messages about Jesus, you better get a hold of this material, because things are not always as they seem from the Western Christian mind. But when you verify with history the fact that a lot of Jesus' miracles were recorded by the Romans.
Yes, they were.
They knew who he was, and they loved him. Joseph of Arimathea, was he a Roman citizen over the Syrian spice trade? Yes, he was. You didn't know that, did you? You're about to find out. So, Ron, gosh, you could choose any of them, but I wanted you to go into one of the wonderful stories about Jesus that you've heard preached 1,000 times in church, but you haven't heard it preached necessarily, maybe you have, to the historical account as mentioned in the Roman Senate annals that still exist in the Vatican to this day, and other documents as well. Mm-hmm. So what's a story of Jesus that you can tell us?
Well, one of the stories that are the most fascinating to me about Jesus and the things that he did is I like to concentrate on those that aren't on the pastoral hit list of the greatest hits.
Okay.
I like those.
Jesus' greatest hits,
yeah.
Dr. Ron Jarrell.
And you know, how many dozens, if not hundreds of sermons have we heard on Jesus walking on the water, of the raising of Lazarus, of blind Bartimaeus, and so forth. But there are those that are just as miraculous, but you really don't hear a lot about.
Right.
And one of those is the healing of Peter's mother.
I thought you might be. What a better time to teach about that than during this global pandemic.
Exactly. History records, and again, the Roman history, the Roman census, Peter's mother-in-law, her name was Lucretia. And she was, they live in Capernaum. And at this time, the Romans were trading all over the world. They were trading for lead and tin up in Britain. They were trading spices and pepper and silk from India and Nepal and what was at one time Tibet and all of that area. And so they were bringing in goods from all over the world. Well, one of these caravans left Tibet, went through Nepal and India, collecting pepper and spikenard and silk that was going to take about 2 years to get to Rome. And so it left left that region in January of the year 27. And and as it traveled, people began to get sick and began to have a strange disease with strange symptoms they'd never seen before. There were tumors began to develop on the neck and under the arm and between the legs and the groin area. And these people would begin to throw up, and it seemed like maybe the internal organs seemed to be dissolving, type thing, and accompanied with sweats and tremendous pain, and then finally with a fever that very quickly advanced into death. And there was a mystery in what it was, and no one really understood it. Tiberius Caesar sent Gaius Americus, who is the same thing as our medical head,
Right.
kind of the general overseer of medicine for Rome, sent him to demand that the caravan, when it got to the northern banks of the Euphrates River, to stop and not to enter into the Roman territory, and to evaluate how to fight this thing and how to combat it. By then, it seemed like it had the same type of characteristics as the bubonic plague.
Right. Sounds like it.
It hadn't been classified that yet, but it was becoming more and more obvious that it very well could be. So there on the banks of the Euphrates River, they stayed for almost 4 months, and it gradually died down. Of course, today we know it's because they ran out of victims.
Right.
And because when they started back up again, then it picked back up. And what had happened is that the fleas that were inhabiting the skin and the hair of the camels and the donkeys and so forth of the caravans were transferring their disease to the people of the caravan.
Wow.
And they in turn were transferring it to people of the area. And so they started back up again, and so the disease began again. So America kind of set up a dam, so to speak, in Damascus. So when the caravan got to Damascus, it came to a halt, and then Americus got permission from Tiberius to do something very drastic so that the disease could be stopped. By this time, they had officially classified it as bubonic plague.
Wow.
And so they didn't know a treatment for it, and so Americus got permission to go into this very dramatic thing, and it says this, that if the tumors have broken open of their own accord, then you qualify to be isolated. If you have a fever, you qualify to be isolated, because by then it was obvious and it had been confirmed that the fever is the last stage before death.
Wow.
And once a person gets fever, then it's 100% certain that they will die. And whoever gets the fever is 100% fatal.
Not a good time to have a fever.
No. That's the last sign of death. And so whoever had the fever, whoever had the tumors that had not been split open by them in a fluid drain, but had actually broken open of their own accord, then they qualified to be also put in quarantine and isolated. And so the people who had the fever or with the tumors that had split of their own accord, they were all put in their various houses, their individual houses that they owned or where they stayed, and they were shut up in there. And once they were shut up, then Americus himself, nobody else was involved with this. Just he wanted to take all of the heat if anything happened. But he would take a torch and he would set fire to the house, and the folks that were in there were burned alive. But it brought a halt to the disease.
That's one way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Over 6,000 people were burned in Damascus, but it did bring a halt to to the disease, but it was only temporary, because when they received permission to go back again,
Right.
then the disease picked up again, because they didn't get rid of the fleas
Wow.
that carried the disease, because at that time they didn't know what carried it.
Right.
And so by the time they continued to the west, by the time they got to Capernaum, it was still running full force by then. Well, Lucretia was at her house there in Capernaum, Peter's mother-in-law, and apparently Peter and the family all lived there with her, and Jesus was in the synagogue. This was on a Sabbath day, and Jesus was there, involved with the Sabbath day ceremonies and rituals. Well, Jesus knew that she was sick. Thank you very much. Jesus knew that she was sick, but she has yet not had a fever. And so Jesus went to the synagogue. Well, while he was there, Lucretia got the fever.
Wow.
Reported to Americus, and Americus came, recorded the names, because not only was Lucretia closed up in her home, but also whoever came in contact with her, whoever touched her, whoever breathed the same air that she breathed, also had to be put into quarantine in the same house.
Wow.
And so Americus arrived. The house was put into quarantine. Lucretia and all of those, perhaps even Peter, but all of those that came in contact with her, and one of those was Jesus. But when this happened, a messenger was sent to go get Jesus. And now Jesus had a choice. He could go back to the house where it was 100% guaranteed that he would not be able to get out of that house before it was burned. And that if he went in there, then he had to stay there. And he would be burned alive with everybody else.
Wow.
And so to prevent that, he didn't have to go. To play it safe, he could just stay where he was. But Jesus was summoned, and being faithful to that summons, Jesus went to the house of Lucretia. Americus was there to record the events, and he was there with torch in hand, ready to set it afire. And so 100% death, 100% fatal. When Jesus arrived, he went in anyway. He went in, and the Word of God tells us that he took Lucretia by the hand, lifted her up, and she was immediately healed and began to service the people. And now the official Roman records from the senatorial annals comes in. And this is what Americus said. This is what he wrote. He says, and the Rabboni from Galilee, who was a friend of the victim, arrived. And he purposely went into the home. And in there, he, with his power, with his mind, or with some force that we are not familiar, raised her, and she became totally free of the disease. And not only that, throughout the remainder of that day, people with the disease from all over the city were brought to the home, and they were healed. And on this day, At this time, at this hour, the plague halted,
Wow.
never to go any further. And so, because Jesus ministered to Lucretia, his friend, the spillover affected millions,
Literally.
literally millions, all the way up to Rome itself. And the disease did not return to the Roman Empire for more than 330 years.
Wow.
During that 330-year period, bubonic plague free.
Wow.
And also it was during that time that people were killed and spared certain death who weren't even believers in Jesus, didn't know anything about him. But because of his love for her and ministering to her, the spillover affected generations and millions of people. And so this insignificant event of Peter's mother-in-law being healed of a fever, it was slightly more complex.
A little more than just a fever.
Exactly. And one of the most astounding miracles ever recorded by the Word of God or by any means, any place, took place right then.
Is this story in The Search?
Yes, it is.
The Search is a book you've got to get, folks. Get it from Dr. Ron, otherwise you'll pay $200 for it on eBay some places. But you got to get The Search. And you can get that on Amazon, but I encourage you, get it, cubitfoundation.org, because you spent over 30 years, right?
Yes.
In Europe, in Africa, in Asia.
72 countries.
72 countries. So tell us about The Search.
Well, that has an interesting beginning, actually. I was a junior in a university, and my Western civilization professor, first day of class, he and at that time I wasn't a believer.
Right.
I was the typical name only Christian
Right.
because I wasn't anything else. And but to say that I was saved or had accepted Christ, I would have to say no. But I knew that God was out there, and I knew that Jesus was true because my dad told me. But this professor stood up on the first day of class. He held the history book in one hand, and he held the Bible in the other. And he says, "This is a book of facts. If you want to know truth, if you want to know facts, then you stay in my class and you'll learn it. This is a book of faith. If you want to know about faith, if you want to know the characteristics of faith, then you need to go down the hall to Dr. Green's philosophy class, and then he can teach you that. Because these two books will never complement one another. They will never agree with one another, and they will never solidify truth in one another, because you have two different arenas."
Challenge accepted.
I raised my hand. I said, "Dr. Griffin, excuse me, but I disagree with you. My father would not have lied to me my whole life. And I believe that this Bible is just as truthful as this history book, if not more so. Because the events of the Word of God, the Bible, are history." And he laughed and snickered. And I said, "And sir, this day, I challenge you to prove that you're wrong." And that was the beginning of my 30-year search. Because that time I went out and initially was going to show that the Bible was truth, but then I realized that was such an overwhelming job to do that I back off to just the life of Jesus, and it was more difficult in itself, and so that began my 30-year search of the life of Jesus, which I've only scratched the surface.
I know.
I mean, there's years, decades more research that could be done out there, and you're just not going to ever come to an end. There's that much information out there, and
Wow.
these educators that say, well, there's not, you only have 3 or 4 references about Jesus in the past. Obviously, there's.
It's another reason why people need to have the search. That's a big book. I mean, that's how many?
About 800 pages.
800 pages. I mean, and then of course you have from there you went to Chasing Jesus. Now it's the Chase.
Right.
And so many other books too. You've actually sectioned out certain sections, certain stories of Jesus and their historical context, and even secular documents that verify that. Folks, you need to have that. I remember my first day at Marxist Center, where it was spoken that we're going to rid these kids of their God. Guess what? It's in more universities than you know. When my friend Bob Fu talks about Confucius centers, it's China, communist China, the CCP sponsored for the Confucius centers to try to rid your child of their faith. So we could do a whole series on that, feeding the Marxist centers that gets millions outside of what you're paying. But you know what, though? You took that challenge and you learned for yourself, and you uncovered things that most people haven't even uncovered, from monasteries to the Vatican, to even universities in America.
Right. And I can say this, it only took me a couple of months of research to realize that, hey, I needed to turn my life over to this. And so I became a believer pretty quickly down the line. And and just as a little side note, the search has been accepted as a supplementary curriculum at the University of Cairo.
Yeah, and Cambridge too.
Yes, correct.
Wow, wow, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, how does that make you feel, brother?
Makes me feel blessed, and the thing that makes me feel better than anything is that whether they want to or not, they're learning about Jesus.
They are learning about Jesus, and it's important to arm yourself with that. You know, the powers that be fear an educated and informed society. Your children and you need to know. You know, you talked about your father and how it didn't become your faith yet at that time.
That's right.
We all go through that. You know, it's our mama's faith, it's our daddy's faith, but all of us have that time when it becomes our faith, usually through adversity or going through the fire. But isn't it wonderful that there are resources that you can educate yourself and know about Jesus and the historical context of Jesus? Time Magazine knows that there's information about Jesus, but what do? Hey, look over here, a little magic trick. You know, oh, was he real or not? The Romans knew about Jesus. Matter of fact, the one that recorded Jesus walking on the water, was he not a Roman official?
He was a Roman centurion initially that became a magistrate and then a senator. Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, we've got 7 minutes, but give us a little more of that. You know how I love to hear about the stories of Jesus. But
well, there's another great story is the woman who was caught in adultery.
Yep.
And you know, throughout the years, we've Hollywood especially has tried to match faces with names, and so many times Mary Magdalene has come up to be supposedly this woman, which is far from the truth.
Right.
This is another one of those stories that are recorded by the Romans, and the story is actually recorded by a Roman historian who is the historian of the court of Phineas Copernicus, who was the governor general for Syria. Governor general means that he was the governor of all military activities of the Romans, of that whole area, all the way from Damascus to Jerusalem and beyond. But that whole area of Judea, Samaria, Galilee, and so forth, he was over the military activities of that. And in fact, he was over Pontius Pilate, for that matter. And Polaris was the historian, the court historian, who wrote everything about that court and about those actions. Well, on this particular Feast of Tabernacles that the Jews were celebrating, Pilate was not able to be there because he had been called to a summons by Tiberius himself. So Copernicus had to go to Jerusalem and supervise be the Roman presence there. Well, he brought his daughter along with him. Her name was Livia. And Livia was actually having an affair with one of the Jewish religious leaders there at the time.
Wow.
And but it's the type of thing that everybody knew it, but nobody cared.
Right.
You know, like us, you stand in line at Kroger's or at Publix or at Albertsons or wherever you do your grocery shopping, Walmart or whatever, and the magazine stands, you know, how many people really get excited about what's happening in Brad Pitt's life,
Right.
or what's happening in J-Lo's life, you know, and do you really care whether they're having an adulterous affair or not, and that type of thing? Well, Olivia and her relationship was the same thing. Everybody knew about it, but nobody cared.
Right.
She was 22 years old, a daughter of a Roman aristocrat, knew that she was having an affair, but nobody really cared about it. But the Pharisees and the scribes who hated Jesus, they said, this is an opportunity for us to neutralize him or even to have him be executed. And so, knowing that Livia was going to be there with her father, these Pharisees broke in on her, and when she was having this illicit activity with this religious leader, and actually pulled her out and pulled her across the yard to confront her to Jesus, because Jesus was there. Now, Copernicus was there at the Tower of Antonia, and when he saw his daughter being manhandled, that's a good way for all those people to be on a death sentence.
Right. To cause a war or an uprising.
Exactly. But he held his cool for a while because he wanted to know where they were going with her. And so they brought her to Jesus. And this was their golden opportunity. You know, there were over 200,000 people in the courtyard at that time. And and they felt that the Romans would probably handle this themselves. So you can imagine the Pharisees. They said, "Excuse me, everybody," blowing the trumpet. "Excuse me, everybody, pay attention. We have a situation here. Jesus, we found this woman committing adultery. Our law says that she must be stoned. But what do you say, Jesus?" Well, now,
What a trap.
that's right. If Jesus would have said, "Stone her," there's a Roman governor right there. Jesus wouldn't have lived another 5 minutes.
Right.
Neither would thousands of others who were there. If he would have said, "No, she's innocent," then all those people out there would have said that Jesus is countermanding the law of Moses.
Right.
So Jesus said to himself and to those that were around, all right, well, I'll tell you, who of you that has no sin, let him cast the first stone. Well, what was being taught at that time is that the man without sin was one of the characteristics of Messiah.
Wow.
So those that were there, if they were to pick up the stones to throw at her, they were signifying, I am a man without sin. I'm Messiah.
Wow.
Neither one of them wanted to accept, or none of them wanted to accept that challenge. So they all dropped the stones, walked away, and Jesus forgave. Now that girl eventually accepted Jesus, went to Damascus, and started a church called the Church of the Forgiving Savior, which is still in operation today.
And you can read about it in the search.
Yes.
You can go to cubitfoundation.org, get the search, get those resources, educate yourself. Know for yourself. You may be the only Bible that anyone ever reads or listens to. And get connected with great ministries like GLC and the Cubit Foundation with Dr. Ron Charles. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Ron Charles. First of many again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on Light of the Southwest.